everybody, welcome back to part 36 of the Trumpeter 1/200 scale Bismarck build with the Pontos set. In this episode I'm going to be finishing off all the anti-aircraft weapons on the ship, so that's another 4 37mm twin mountings and 6 of the single 20mm guns. These were all anti-aircraft weapons, and in the main they're made up from Pontos turn brass, and as in this case, and with the barrels, and quite a bit of photo etch, which is all on this fret here. So we'll be clearing quite a bit of this, I hope, during this video. I have actually built some of these way back in the series. I've built a handful of them on camera. So you may have already seen how these go together if you've followed every step of the build. But it's one of the things about building, particularly naval subjects, where there's a lot of repetition of these sort of weapons and other parts on the ship, that it's difficult to do a week by week build log without repeating some things. So apologies if you have already seen this. If you haven't, you can either watch this one or go back to that original part of the build, and I'll leave a description for that in the video description here. So that's the background of why we're doing these at this stage, and we'll get on. I'm going to start with these 20mm first of all, and then at the end of the video I'm going to go back to the ship as we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 episodes, and I'll show you where they go and how we locate them on the ship. So I'll be building these production line style, so I'll do each step to all 6 mountings. For this work it's essential to have a good, accurate pair of tweezers, and these are surgical grade ones. They're actually ophthalmology tweezers. An alternative to these would probably be some professional watchmaking tweezers. It's a similar sort of work to watchmaking, and there's plenty of outlets for watchmaking equipment if you look online, but it's well worth investing if you're doing a lot of photo etch work. I'd say it's pretty essential to have really good tools like this. When you compare tweezers like this to even things that you might think are really good, like Tamiya tweezers, they're just not in the same league. So those are the carriages, if you like, for the barrels. This is a gel type CA that I'm using, partly because I've run out of my normal medium super glue, and I just had this available, so it does okay for these sort of jobs. got a spare just in case one flies off into the modelling room. Now to bend these, I just use the back of a knife blade, almost like an anvil, to bend the breech around to form that sort of tray shape. The barrel slots inside there. The back of the blade is just the correct width to do that. Now at the end of these breeches we've got a tiny piece of brass, which it looks insignificant but it isn't, because that needs to be folded across to form an open box, and that piece of brass just holds the barrel at the correct angle. You'll see in a moment. So just fold each end over. Don't need any glue for this. When I come to fit some of these barrels, I'm going to have 4 of them in the stowed position, so the barrel pointing upwards. Just to add a bit of variety. It's a thing that I like to do with ships, just to add a bit of interest. But we'll come to that. You'll see what I mean when we come to put the barrels on the pedestals. To finish that off, you can just pinch the sides of the breech onto the barrel. Just tightens it all up. These next pieces of photo etch, I think, are the hardest piece to work with on these guns. The piece carries the sights and they're very fine. And it's difficult to work out from the Pontos instructions exactly how they fold up. The first thing to do is to fold the tray part, which is this lower piece. But at this stage, it's really important to have some good references. These help with working out how these photo etch parts should bend. So in this case we've got the 20mm mounting that we're working on, and this is the arrangement for the sight. So it's in line with the barrel. That gives us some clues about which way to fold the photo etch. And you can't really build a model like this without this sort of reference. You get a better idea here of how the sight lies on the weapon. And this is the position that I'm going to build 4 of the guns. You'll also notice that the gun also had this net, which Pontos provide. That was obviously to catch the cartridges to stop them flying all over the deck. And as I said, Pontos provide those, but I'm not going to fit them to all of them. These with the maximum elevation position, I'm going to leave the nets off. So let's see if we can work out the bends on these sights. Actually, I'll take back what I said earlier about the sight being in line with the barrel. It isn't, it's just offset to the left, according to the anatomy of the ship drawings. As with all photo etch, it's just as well not to bend these pieces backwards and forwards, because they will break eventually. And I think he possibly would have an awful lot of trouble to reassemble these very delicate photo etch sights if he did break them. So the method I use for these is to fold up the tray and then pop the barrel and the breech in, and then the next bend is to bend the sight plate down so that sight at this stage is moving out to the left of the breech, and then the sight comes up on its frame like that through 90 degrees. And the hardest one to do, the hardest bend to make, is the sight itself, because the stem is so tiny, but you can just bend it over like that. And then the ring at the front needs to come up, if you can find it. Now there is another bend at the back, but I don't think it's worth making that. And that's because the chances of over bending this part is just too great if you start to mess about with that, and it's virtually invisible anyway. So I don't think it's worth taking the risk. Okay, now before we put these barrels in the mountings, I just want to do a little bit more work on the pedestals. So we've got an ammunition tray to go in and a training wheel as well to fit onto these. Now unfortunately we have to fit some little dividers into these. So we'll do 2 with the dividers on, and I'll do 4 with the actual magazines loaded into these trays. If you don't like working with photo etch, and I can understand those of you that don't, there is an alternative to these at a company called Veteran Models, and I think they do 3D printed 20mm guns. I'll try and find a reference and leave that in the video description if you don't want to be bothered with all this photo etch work. The other thing you could do is just use the kit parts, but believe me, they're not anywhere near as good as the photo etch or the 3D alternatives. So for the other 4 magazine holders, these 4, I'll fit the magazines into them themselves, so there's 5 in each one. So these all need to be folded over, and hopefully they'll fit in the trays. I'm not sure because I've not done this before. I might get away with putting 4 in if they don't fit. Only we'll know. Okay, so it does need, the magazine holder does need 5 magazines in, so as not to leave a gap. What you couldn't do with these is put the magazines and the dividers, but I don't think that would look any good anyway. You'd just end up with more glue than brass, and I just don't think you'd be able to distinguish the parts. You'd just have a pretty solid blob of brass and glue. These are the training wheels, which fit on the same side as the magazine holder. Okay, now to bring the 2 assemblies together. We'll put some magazines loaded onto these. The last piece to fit to these 20mm mountings are the cradles, the shoulder cradles for the gunner. We can adjust these once they're fitted to the gun. You don't worry too much about getting the shoulder pads exactly right at this stage. Cut a spare out, one too many. Okay, so they've come out alright. They're a bit fiddly, but they're probably worth it in the end. And I've just got the same thing to do now with 4 of the 37mm twin mounts. Get those next. So for the 37mm we use a bit more of the Trumpeter plastic than we did with the 20s. With the platforms fitted to the mounting, we can just put these braces on. There are 4 on each, so a bit of work to do. So we have some longer ones and these short ones which go on the side. I'll show you in a moment. There are some markings on the base to show where these braces fit. With the braces done, we need some more parts from the Trumpeter kit. These are the mountings for the gunner's seats. So with the supports in position from the Trumpeter kit, we can put the photo etch seats on now. Once the glue's dried on these seats, you can just go back and just adjust them a little bit, but don't mess about with them too much. Another piece from the Trumpeter kit. This is the last one that we're going to need. These all look like spares. I can't imagine where they go now, but you'll know that if you've been watching the videos that I've used spare photo etch from frets on a number of things recently, so that's a good example. Those will very likely come in really useful at some stage. Again, I'm looking at the references in the Anatomy of the Ship book for this gun, and again, it's essential because the Pontos drawings are so tiny that it's not possible to make out where the parts fit. And I know that some people have pointed out in the past that Pontos do have instructions online that you can obviously enlarge on the computer, PC or whatever. But in the case of the Bismarck, those drawings are no better really than, or photographs are no better than what you get on the instruction sheet. So they're absolutely no use at all. Okay, we'll just set those mountings aside for a moment while we sort the barrels out. So we need the Trumpeter breeches, just cut the barrels off. And these are the brass barrels that Pontos supply. And with these we need to drill out the breech, which as you can see is very tiny. So we need the smallest drill. I think mine's 0.3 millimeter, but I will centre mark that just to make sure we don't stray off, because if that happens you just destroy the breech. You just wreck the plastic and destroy it. So we've got to be accurate with this. Now, Pontos tell us to drill these out to 0.5 millimeters, but when I look at these I can only see 0.5 millimeters right the way across the breech, so I can't imagine that I'm going to be able to do that. So I'll try a 0.4 and see if I can push the barrel into position. I've done this before and I can't remember how I managed to do it now, but so it's definitely 0.5. As Pontos say, we'll just have to see if we can drill the holes out accurately without destroying the breech. Which is a bit of a test really with this plastic. So I'm about to fit the barrels now, and what I'd advise if you're building these is to remove the pips on the Trumpeter plastic, and there are two holes in the breech. You might just be able to see them, they're very small, but they're meant to clip into those pips, but in practice that doesn't really work. And they're better just glued into position. So get rid of the pips and just glue the barrel into the what is in effect a tray on top of the mounting. So just like that. Once the plastic has set, we can adjust the barrels just to make sure that everything's pointing in the right direction. It's always really important with these guns where we've added turned brass barrels is to make sure that everything looks as though it's aligned properly. You can do it a little bit before the plastic sets, but let it go hard and then you can do any final adjustments. While I'm waiting for the barrels to dry, I'll just add these final details, which are the elevation mechanism which goes underneath the barrels. So just one fold and just drop it in behind, in between the breeches. Okay, so they're done. I'll straighten these barrels out. Most of them are okay, there's just this one that looks a bit odd. Now, one thing that I did forget to do was earlier on when I was doing these 20mm guns was the cartridge baskets, and I said that I'd add them to these two mountings here. So let's just do that before we go over to the spray booth. These are a bit of a masterpiece really in photo etch design. As you can see how complicated the shape is, but the folds are really accurate on these. Some of the angles are a bit difficult to judge, but you can just do it gradually until it comes into shape. The difficult thing with them, that's the folded basket, the difficult thing with them is to locate them onto the gun, because you've only got this mounting point here, which is pretty small considering the size of the piece, and that's a good reason why I'm only doing 2 of them. So I'm not going to attempt to glue those, because all that will achieve is to block up the mesh detail. So they'll look alright just folded up like that. So the trick with these, because it's such a small contact area, is to just get it to tack on like that, and then use some super glue accelerator just to bind it, and that fixes it solid. So even though it's a very fragile assembly, the super glue will hold it in place, and then at that point you can just make the final adjustment to bring the net up to the side of the breech, where it will be positioned to catch the cartridges as they came out of the right side of the weapon. So they're a really nice detail, they're a nice addition, but I don't have the patience to do that for all 10 of them, and I'm going to call that a day for assembly. We'll get all these parts over, I'll get them painted, and the method that I'll use for that is to paint the 37mm in rubber black to start with overall, and then I'll pick out the details in sky grey. The 20mm are the opposite way around, I'll do them in sky grey and pick out the details in black. So let's get the base colours on, and then I'll do that detail painting before we go over to the ship. Okay, we need to do the detail painting on these 37mm now. I've painted them in rubber black, and now I'm picking out the actual mounting with some sky grey. You could do this the opposite way around and pick out the black with a paintbrush, but I think I worked it out that this was the easiest way of the two. For the 20mm guns it's the opposite process, just paint the barrels in black, or the gun itself. Okay, I think that'll do, and I'll get the camera set up back at the ship and we'll get these parts fitted. Okay, here we are back at the model, and we have a couple of 37s to fit at the aft side of the ship here. And a pair of the 20mm as well. Okay, we'll move everything forward. and a couple more of the 20s. Okay, you remember that I built 6 20mm guns, and the other 2 go on the funnel platform. So these sort of parts are safer on the model rather than hanging around on the bench, so I might as well get them on now. So I've got the 2 20mm fitted to the funnel platform, and I also want to get this off the bench. This is one of the quad flank mountings. There's 2 of these on the upper bridge, so let's fit this as well. These searchlights have also been sitting around, so let's get rid of these as well. Okay, I'm happy with that. A little bit more progress this week, and we're certainly getting there with it. There's probably another month to 6 weeks work, which is just about right timing this to be ready for Scale Model World at Telford in November. So I'm going to leave it there. I've got the rest of the week now. I can do some work on the special hobby Tempest that I've been building on the channel. So I'm going to have a little bit of a break from this for a few days, but I will be coming back with another update next Friday. In the meantime, thanks for joining me for this one, everybody, and hopefully I'll see you either for the Tempest or for the next part of this Bismarck build. Bye for now.